This is episode 746 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. I am very pleased to be joined by Christopher Erickson. He is a professor of the Gary and Catherine Carruthers Chair for, and he is the Gary and Catherine T. Carruthers Chair for Economic Development at New Mexico State University. And he's a returning guest here to Tipping Point, New Mexico. And of course, welcome back to Tipping Point, New Mexico, Chris.
Very happy to be here, and I'm looking forward to today's conversation.
Wonderful. Well, just to give folks listening a little bit of an idea of what we're going to do, Chris recently produced or co-produced, I don't remember which, a report on the spaceport. And of course, that's New Mexico Spaceport America and its economic impact. We're going to dive into that. And that'll be about the first half of the show. The second half of the show, Chris was recently quoted in an article on Channel 7 KOAT. I don't know if you've done any in-depth research on this. We can talk about that when that topic comes up. But the second part will be about free childcare and its economic implications. So again, I appreciate you coming on, Chris, and let's get into it. Spaceport America generated an economic impact of approximately $240 million in New Mexico during 2024. That is your finding of the NMSU Arrowhead Center study. So why don't you put some meat on those bones? Tell us a little bit about this report, what it means, and was it your work by yourself, or did you have a co-author or anything like that? Because I apologize.
Well, I had two co-authors.
All right.
I'm the director of the Center for Border Economic Development. I work very closely with Lucinda Vargas, and then who's well known in the local area. For example, did the strategic plan for the city of Juarez. And then Kramer Winningham at Arrowhead Center, who is actually the guy that actually crunches the numbers for these things. And the report we did is something that uses a program called IMPLAN. And IMPLAN is a very standard program that's used in very often in these kind of studies. And we used a very straightforward technique that is well established. There are alternative methodologies you can use. But this is probably the most commonly used one. And we did in making this study, we did a number of things. For example, we took into account the fact that there are certain tax exemptions for investment at the spaceport, and we accounted for that when we calculated the tax impacts. Another thing we did is we subtracted off the state and local subsidies. So we did not count those state and local subsidies as part of the impact, neither directly. We subtracted those off of the direct impact. And then the way these models work, if you reduce the direct impact, you also reduce the indirect impact and the induced impact. And the reason why we did that is because we recognize that there are other uses for these funds other than the spaceport. They could be used to pave roads. They could be used to hire teachers. They could be used to, I don't know what, give a tax cut. And so recognizing that, we don't want to count those as part of the economic impact. We're looking at what the spaceport is generating independent of the subsidies it's receiving from the state.
So let me just quickly ask you about those subsidies. So, we're talking about. And maybe I'm missing something because it is kind of hard to fully appreciate all of the subsidies. Of course, it cost $220 million thereabouts to build. I know the spaceport just celebrated its quote unquote 20th birthday, but that's really, basically the legislation, not the actual construction and finalization of the facility. So it hasn't been
Creation
open
of the
quite that
Spaceport
long.
Authority.
Okay, fair enough. And then there were millions of dollars spent on runways and hangars. And then there's also the annual operating costs. I understand about 4.5 million of that is from the general funds. Does that check with what you're saying?
It's something like that. And then there's state and local, I mean, not local, I mean, there's state, you just mentioned the state, but there's also some of the sales tax go for the local counties go to the spaceport too.
Yeah, Doña Ana and Sierra
Yeah,
counties pay a combined $17 million or
yeah.
thereabouts annually. Now that's actually part of the original payment structure.
Hmm.
Those taxes remain in place, and they're paying for the
The bonds.
bonds on the construction of
Yeah,
the facility itself,
yeah.
as opposed to the operations, which of course,
They also go to support some educational programs in the community.
right, right.
Yeah.
Are there addition? Is that it? Are we talking
I
about
think
any additional?
that's a pretty good summary, and those numbers sound approximately correct. I will point out, and that 220 million to build the spaceport initially, we don't subtract that out because that's sunk costs. We're talking about the current expenditures on the spaceport. I think it's pretty safe to say if we knew it was going to take this long to ramp up the spaceport, we would have thought twice about investing that $220 million that we did to build the spaceport. And we're looking not at what was spent in the past, but actually what is going on today and what's going on into the future. And Paul, I know you know this, but when you're doing these kind of analysis, it's very important to not fall into what they call the sunk cost fallacy, which is looking at the costs that are already incurred that we cannot get back, that are not really affecting current decisions, and only focus on what's going on now, the things that we can actually change now. And when you do that, the spaceport is currently generating a fair amount of economic activity and is a driver of employment in Sierra and Doña Ana counties.
And that's fair. And I do want to talk about that. In fact, I intended to speak just specifically about what this economic impact actually means, but we kind of went down things a different direction, specifically on the taxing. And you said you pulled out, or that
Net it
you
out.
netted out the taxes on that. Now, I just want to kind of work through a little bit of a thought experiment, because you're talking about gross receipts tax specifically from Doña
Well,
Ana and
sales tax,
Sierra.
yeah, gross receipts tax, and also the general funding from the general fund, general revenues of the state.
Now, when I look at these kinds of numbers, the taxes, $17 million annually, of course, we have to understand that we're taxing economic activity. The only way we get any of those taxes into government is through pre-existing economic activity. So in Las Cruces, the GRT is 8.39%, and TRC, the rate is 8.375%, which means that essentially for every dollar, give or take, and we're just going to kind of back of the envelope this. We're not going to go into specific, real detailed numbers, but you're essentially requiring $10 of pre-existing spending to happen in order to generate $1 of tax revenue. You track what I'm saying there, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, I think that's correct. Yeah.
Okay, so given that we're talking here about economic impact, do you how do you pull that money out? And I realize we're talking in a more kind of general audience, not a people who use implan
Right.
for a living. I've never used implan for a living, but how do you account for that or back that out? Because
Well,
that's a lot of
well,
economic, kind of holistic economic activity that you're expecting to pay for this tax
right.
revenue.
So, so let me really big picture, 10,000 foot picture.
Sure.
When you're allocating tax revenue, of course, you want to allocate to the place where it has the most impact. Now, that could be a social impact, like feeding starving children, or it could be an economic impact, like paving roads that are then used by businesses and by workers that work at those businesses for transportation and for customers who go to those businesses to make purchases. And so the question is, and so the taxes are always, we always have infrastructure needs in a society that are best met through taxation and government spending. Uh, the spaceport is an example of that kind of infrastructure expenditure. And the question is this cost effective compared to alternatives that you could use the taxes for, including tax cuts? I'm not taking that off the table, because if you can get a bigger bang for your buck by cutting taxes than by building another road, well, then that's what you should do. It's always a cost benefit analysis. And our argument is that when you look at the relatively modest amount that's being spent on taxes, and you're generating the number you said, Sandra, I think it was 14 million you said. The 14 million that you say is what we subtracted off. And what way we did this, now going down a little bit further, but still pretty high up, we looked at the revenue generated at the spaceport, and we subtract it off. This is by the spaceport itself, so the revenue coming back to the state, and we subtracted off the taxes that were used to support that revenue, and we looked at that net revenue less tax subsidies, and that's what we use to calculate our economic impact.
All right. Well, that is fair enough. Let's get into it. What is economic impact? Because one of the criticisms we've had of studies, and actually Arrowhead's done good work on the film subsidy program, is they use what
Yep.
I consider to be loosey-goosey or inane terminology that is hard to define. And I'll just broadly speaking, what does economic impact mean to you in this report?
Well, of course, that's a really good question. And economists usually define economic impact as an increase in economic activity generated from something. Now, what we want to look at is what we call new money or new revenue or new employment. You can start with jobs, you can start with revenue, and you can even start with investment, dollars invested. Any one of those starting places, then what we do is we use the in-plan model, and the in-plan model, and I again don't want to get too technical, but it uses a input-output matrix, which relates each industry to each other industry, who you buy from, who you sell to, and that's calibrated to Doñana County and to Sierra County. And then we use a kind of add-on to the in-plan model that allows us to then calculate the impact for the state as a whole. And so this model is calibrated to local conditions. And that's what allows us to do a pretty good estimate. The 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 We then look at measures of output, and so one measure we use as impact that's often measured is what we call output, which is approximately the same as revenue. Approximately the same as revenue. And when you do that, uh, you are including inputs. So you include the inputs, you include the labor added in locally, the business income that's generated locally, other property income that's generated locally, and you add inputs you buy from somewhere else, and that gives us the total output. Many economists, including myself, even though it's more common to use output as the measure of economic impact, which again is revenue, many of us prefer to use value added. And value added is essentially the increment to GDP, or in this case, we're talking about GSP, gross state product. And that's the increase in economic activity within our state. So output is includes inputs that we buy from other people from out of state, but value added is just what we produce in the state, and so our economic impact measures that value added. And we
Okay.
actually report all these numbers, but value added is the one I would focus on.
Okay. Well, I, I guess with the limited time
Yeah.
to hash this further out, you know, it does seem like there would be other more impactful ways to use this money. You mentioned tax cuts, and I appreciate that because that would certainly be one model, one approach that we would have used. Have you or has anybody ever done an in-plan economic impact model on something as basic as tax reduction? Because yes, the idea of doing something and doing nothing, like for example, just hypothetically, uh, you're talking about a $240 million economic impact. Uh, the likely alternative, given New Mexico's political leadership and current situation, would not be to provide tax cuts. It would be to dump the money into New Mexico's permanent fund, its sovereign wealth fund, to be invested out of state and
Exactly.
obviously generate revenue for the future. But I can imagine that your in-plan model, and I know it's not yours, but that model would not exactly give a high recommendation to that use of the money, and we
Yeah.
would concur with that completely. But how about a reduction in the GRT or a reduction in personal income
Well,
taxes?
I,
How would you think that would work out?
yeah, I haven't run those numbers. I have run them in the context of other settings, but I haven't run them in the context of this setting. It'd be interesting to do. Maybe I should do that. But I will say that if you look at our value added, the net increment to economic activity is 110 million. So on a $14 million investment, again, we're not talking about the $200 million years ago, but that $14 million investment is generating a lot of output. And I find it, I think it's because this is a good infrastructure project always has huge returns, always has huge returns because it supports a lot of economic activity. And the spaceport is an infrastructure project. It is building something that businesses then can use to generate jobs and revenues and profits. And the spaceport is the spaceport is producing about $110 million in economic activity. That was last year. It varies a lot too, because it's kind of lumpy. It's sort of a there's only a few. Well, I shouldn't say only a few, but the there are some large clients, there's some small clients, and there's clients who come and go, and there's clients who stay on for a number of years. And because of that, those clients that come and go, and also because Virgin Galactic's operations are kind of up and down, there's quite a bit of variation. But last year was 110 or it was 110 billion in value added for a 14 or $1 million investment by the state. And I think that that's a pretty good return. I don't think a tax cut would generate that kind of return, but it wouldn't be zero either. It wouldn't be zero either. I'm going to have to say I want to emphasize what I would compare it to would be paving a road. Would we get more value? I think for the numbers we're talking about is maybe 3 miles of new freeway. Would 3 miles of new freeway generate that much income as a spaceport? And the answer is, if it's in the right place, maybe. Because if you increase if you speed up transportation in a major metropolitan area, maybe that would be a better investment. But as the first pass, I'm not sure it would be.
All right, fair enough. We will we will leave it there on this particular issue. Just so our listeners to be fully candid and to share with you as well. Rio Grande Foundation was not a fan of the spaceport. remains not a fan of the spaceport and the fact that so many tax dollars were used on it. I do think there are many, many other ways to use those dollars that are tied up in the facility and would have been better served in using those dollars. And I'm skeptical about numbers showing, kind of big economic benefit to the spaceport. That being said, I do think there are very limited options at this point
Exactly.
as to what else to do with the facility. There's really, I've heard people talk about UPS transshipment facilities and others to use the long runway, but you have to completely retrofit it, and of course, there's simply not the workforce anywhere near there. There's very few options, so we've kind of been supportive, broadly speaking, of seeing what we can do to keep Spaceport America and its tenants going in the right direction without overspending and overinvestment there. And we'll very much be waiting and watching to see what happens with Virgin Galactic if they can ever get their space tourism business back in action and make it a financially viable approach to doing business. So we'll just have to wait and see.
Could I add that I agree with
Absolutely.
everything you just said. I absolutely agree with it. If this was 20 years ago, maybe we shouldn't have gone down this path, but we're here now.
Exactly. I understand that. And
Yeah, I agree with you.
we'll
Everything you said is exactly on the money.
well, I'm glad to have your endorsement there, as especially, given your august position at New Mexico State University and the fact that, we're not necessarily agreeing in a lot of ways, but we ultimately agree on the economic aspect of it. Now, moving on to a far more recent, at least political decision that I wanted to talk to you about. And I mentioned this at the outset, and I won't read through all of your comments necessarily. You can feel free to cite those or elaborate in any way, shape, or form. But of course, the governor recently outlined universal childcare. The state has been providing childcare for those making up to 400% of the federal poverty level, which is something approximating $110,000 for a family of three. And you essentially seem to be saying that you think this could be an economic boon for New Mexico. You cite data from Denmark and other places. Why do you think this, especially since this is geared towards really high earners, and I realize
Yeah.
that you and I may be more free market, certainly than the governor, but this is a unique
Yeah.
program, I think, to be had by dint of the fact that it's so heavily focused in this latest iteration on those earning a pretty high income. So, what is your take on this policy and and its impact?
Well, of course, this is a subsidy for young families. It encourages, and I don't want to overemphasize this because I think there's a lot of things that go into having children besides how much they cost. But it does encourage parenthood. It does encourage people to have children because it reduces the burden of having a child economically. But my argument is the following. There's James Heckman is a very conservative economist. His office used to be next to Milton Friedman's at the University of Chicago, and he won the Nobel Prize, I think, in the year 2000 for econometrics. And he's done studies, and the story is I think it's kind of an interesting story, which he tells himself, and I'll just very quickly summarize, is that he was asked to do a study of childcare, and he expected to find that was terrible, that it had terrible outcomes, and that the best thing would be for children to be raised by their parents. And that's not what he found. What he found instead was that high quality childcare. I'm not talking about uh, overcrowded daycare facilities, but high quality daycare actually has a return of approximately the same as the stock market, 8, 9, 10%. And the way that return occurs is by reducing incarceration rates because kids who are socialized at a very young age are much less likely to be incarcerated. And it also has a return by increasing high school and college graduation rates. And again, people who have high school degrees and college degrees generally have higher incomes. And for that reason, you can show that for every dollar spent on particularly young children, that will have a return that will result in a very high return. And that return, that 7% return that we're talking about, is over the working career of the child. And so that, in my mind, says that when you do the cost benefit analysis on this, it has benefits.
All right. Well, let me first. I there's an old joke in economics, and I don't remember the joke, but I know what you said that made me think about it, which is assume that it's high quality, and
That's a good
that
point.
that remains the tilting at windmills, the Don Quixote trade of New Mexico.
Yeah.
That there's always this assumption that there's high quality, and we're talking K-12 where we're dead last
Yep.
on all the metrics.
Yep.
We're talking CYFD, where I don't need to recant all of the failures of that agency. And then now free childcare. And before I hand it back to you, I will say that there was an article in the Santa Fe New Mexican, September 13th, 2025. So very recently, New Mexico has slipped in increasing childcare capacity, analysts say. And it basically is about how fewer people who are already eligible for the free childcare, the numbers are actually on the decline, 3% between fall of 2019 and spring of 2023. And I don't know what that exactly means, why that decline in people deciding to take up this program. But there was also a discussion within the article about the lack of providers. And why would you assume that this is going to be a high quality program?
Yeah, I saw that article and I actually found that very concerning too.
Okay.
And it is absolutely critical that this be done right because bad childcare is bad childcare. And whether it's free or not, I think there's a lot of parents out there who have had the experience, at least I had with my kids, and this is many years ago. My children are in their mid 30s now, but many years ago, I got a child care provider, and they were terrible, and I had to change. I had to change, and hopefully that isn't the situation here. If it's low quality childcare, then that's not good. Everything I'm talking about is assuming high quality childcare. There's one other benefit to childcare. Like I mentioned, encouraging having children, and also the return to better outcomes for the children. But another advantage of it, of course, is that it also enables people women particularly, given our culture, to go back to work earlier than they would otherwise because they don't have to worry about paying for childcare and don't worry about getting a job that would allow them to pay for childcare. So with that, I am a little, I hear you. I think it's a legitimate concern to say, will this be done right? And I sure hope it is. And if it's not, then I think if we reevaluate in a year and say the rollout hasn't worked, then we may want to talk about it.
Well, I'm going to throw an assignment out to you, which is we've had free childcare since May of 2022 for those earning up to 400%. Is there any evidence? And obviously, I hope when the legislature convenes in January in the 30-day session and ultimately deliberates on this, that they have someone who has done some work on this. May of 2022 is long enough to have some kind of data showing whether the existing free childcare program has had positive economic impacts. I am skeptical, and I'll share a little bit more on that, but I do want to give you a chance to respond to that
Well,
particularly.
I actually don't think that that is enough time because a lot of these benefits, the study I talked about with Heckman earlier, James Heckman earlier, they're looking at outcomes in adulthood. They're looking at here's a child who was in high quality daycare 25 years ago. Where are they today? And that's one of the problems with economic development policies, of educational policies, and things like that. That very often the impact is not really seen until particularly children until that child is an adult. So I'm not sure, but what would be interesting would be to see some metrics as to what kind of programs are in these daycares. The number of providers per student or per child, and those sorts of things, because we do have an idea of what it takes, what the inputs are to get high quality childcare.
All right. Now, we're talking about two different issues here. I just want to preface that.
Yeah,
Pre-K, we have had for 2 decades, and Heckman's a name that's been
yeah,
bandied about in the pre-K side of things. Pre-K and early childhood and daycare are two different things, even though
sure.
they're often put
Yeah,
together. But we've had some form of taxpayer financed pre-K for 2 decades.
yeah.
And again, the legislature, I mean, they've had a few studies, but I've never seen a double, uh, you know, a, where you have a pre-existing control sample and the non-control group that's actually been impacted by the program.
Mhm.
I haven't seen any good data on
Yeah,
the impact of pre-K. In fact, we're dead last in education. We
yeah,
weren't dead last when those programs came about. So even if we get data or the lack of data showing that this program, which is costing hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars every single year, whether it's actually having a positive impact. New Mexico politicians have a very spotty track record of A, commissioning those kinds of reports, and B, doing anything relating to them besides throwing them in the trash can once they get them, especially if
that
they
I
don't
agree
like
with.
the
They really
results.
they don't read the ones they. I agree that study is needed. I will mention if they're citing Heckman about pre-K, Heckman's very clear that it's years 1 and 2 that are the most important. Those are the years that have the big returns. The older the child gets, the more attenuated the returns are. I think the studies he's done would not say there's zero return to pre-K, but it's not like I said, it's not the equivalent of investing in the stock market the way that this very early child care programs are. And it is important that it be high quality, and it would be important, I think, to check and make sure. Again, we know the inputs for high quality. We don't know, that's not the same as measuring the output, but make sure that those inputs are in place, that there's enrichment programs, and there's enough caregivers and that sort of thing. But I agree. I'm a professor. I make my living doing these kinds of studies. There's plenty of space here for more studies.
All right. We're getting up to the time limit, but I wanted to talk to you about uh, two issues and kind of conflate them as best as possible because we simply don't have the time
Yeah,
to talk about them both
sure.
discreetly. But one is New Mexico's abysmal labor force participation rate, and the other is our crisis, what I would call a crisis, in terms of young people not living or being moving elsewhere, or simply people not having children in the state of New Mexico. I have data from the Census Bureau showing that since 2020, New Mexico is the second most state that's seen the second biggest decline in our youth population. So I under 18 population. So I totally agree with you, but I want to focus on this labor participation rate issue because we have at the Rio Grande Foundation really looked into that, and we have tremendous concerns. I believe that 99% of that problem is generated due to cushy welfare programs. And you mentioned to KOAT Denmark, and you kind of cite them as a kind of a oriented towards success model when it comes to childcare. Now, I just want to go through a few data points here. First and foremost, Denmark does not offer free childcare, but subsidizes it, and to the point where the parents or the family pays 25% of the total cost. That's been in place since 2006. The municipalities, interestingly enough, pick up the 75% subsidy. Now, the female labor force participation rate in Denmark is 59.8%, where the male participation rate is 67.75%. You know off the top of your head, I can share it, but I want to give you a chance to wow the audience. What is New Mexico's give or take workforce participation rate?
I believe it's lower than that. Believe it's under 60%. I couldn't give you down to the
That's
second.
okay. Yeah, it's 57.8% as of July of 2025. So the upshot is that women in Denmark have a higher workforce participation rate by 2 percentage points than New Mexico as a state. And it's essentially 10% difference if you look at men versus New Mexico as a whole. So
Yeah.
my point is, ultimately, I think there are a lot of problems with our labor force participation rate in New Mexico. And I don't think the lack of childcare is really, it may be in the top 10, but I think it's maybe 9 or 8, maybe 10. We have a lot of cultural and other welfare-oriented problems, lack of diversification of our workforce, just incentives for getting people to work in New Mexico. My point being that politicians in New Mexico see a problem, and that rather than trying to solve the problem, they throw money at the problem. And this is yet another case of that tendency, in my estimation. So I know that's a lot of information to throw at you, but go for it.
Well, I agree. I don't know if it's eighth or ninth or tenth. I would say the most important problem with workforce participation is the fact that we cannot retain our well-trained young people in our state because we don't have job creation in our state. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and they are culturally based, and they are this attitude that New Mexico, this is New Mexico, we do things different here. Well, when you're losing your population, your young, productive population in other states, and when you have very slow job growth, which we've had very slow job growth since 2008 in our state. We've caught up a little bit in the last couple of years, but if you look at that 10-year trend, it's pretty poor. But I guess I guess now it's more than 10 years since 2008. And if you look at that, you see that that is because we are not promoting the right kind of growth in our state. I was just involved with the county commission hearings here in Doña Ana County for Project Jupiter. And Project Jupiter is a data center that's going to focus on providing AI services for AI, and that is going to be the largest single investment in New Mexico history. And there was a huge uproar about this, and it's a cultural uproar. Oh, and I can't fathom what they're thinking. Yet yes, it is a big project, but that's what the state needs to bump us up. And my argument would be that we have a not business friendly environment. And that means that the really good jobs are not staying in the state, and that means the really high young workers who have high labor force participation rates do not stay in the state, and it is really a tragedy. I wish that my kids lived closer to me. I wish they could find jobs here, but I have a daughter instead who lives in Phoenix, which is an area that has fast growth, and a daughter that lives in, or a son that lives in San Diego, again, an area with a vibrant economy.
Yeah, and we didn't at the Rio Grande Foundation take a stance on Project Jupiter. I am looking through an article here. It says 2,500 workers to build the campus, and this is a data center.
Yep.
750 permanent workers.
Yep.
That's not a trivial number. My only question would be, they definitely gave a generous industrial revenue bond and generous inducements to allow that facility to be created. But New Mexico, and I support economic development. I support this project ultimately, but uh, there's not a lot of states like New Mexico where you have so few natural disasters and so many advantages for these kinds of facilities. And
Right.
yeah, 750 people permanently employed. That is nothing to sneeze at all, given New Mexico's overall economic condition. But it just seems like all of these things, as you say, are like pulling teeth. Now, lowering taxes, making New Mexico more business friendly from a regulatory and tax, and not to mention improving our education system so that we have a better educated workforce. All of those
Right.
things are critical. But uh, why do we have to give away so much to get a project like this Project Jupiter to come
Well,
here?
it's because that's what other states do, and it's a competitive market. The people behind this project have a number of different projects going on in other states in various phases of completion. If we did not provide them with this incentive, they would say, "Well, why?" And I heard this at a meeting that they literally their next stop would be Wyoming if we didn't if we turned them down. And I don't know if that's an official thing, but I heard it at one of the officials talking about and said Wyoming. And if so, Wyoming is willing to give them these kind of tax incentives, and if we don't, then we're not going to keep them. And you could argue if you're a completely free market person that these incentives are counterproductive. And it's these businesses, particularly large businesses, like to do this, pitting one location against another to get the best deal they can, and that then increases the burden on everybody else because we still need the infrastructure, we still need the schools, but the alternative is to not get the revenue. Now, the project will contribute in total, I think it's $360 million over 30 years to the county budget. The 750 jobs are for phase one. Now, there's plans for a phase two and a phase three. And of course, as is often the case with these kind of development projects, when phase two and phase three will happen is a little bit more ambiguous, and it's years in the offing. Probably phase one will take at least 5 years to implement. And if phase two and phase three are of a kind, it may be, years of construction activity. 3 to 5 years in phase one, and then the same for phase two and phase three. And I don't want to oversell that because the future is the future, and we don't know what's going to happen in the future. But it's not just what they're doing right now, but what they could be doing in the future too.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you for a hopefully insightful and informative discussion about some of these critical issues. And Chris, if folks want to, reach out to you or find out more about your work, your paper on the spaceport economic impact, how do they find more about you and your work?
Well, I think if they Google seabed, CBED, Center for Border Economic Development, if they Google seabed, I think that we'll be at the top of the list, and then they can click on that and they'll go to our website. And we have a number of reports. The spaceport reports are up there, as well as a number of other reports we've done. I really thank you for having me on. I really, really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed talking to someone who knows the issues like you do.
All right. Well, I appreciate it, and we'll look forward to future areas we can agree and disagree on some of these economic issues, and have you back on again.
Yep.
All right.
Thank
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointsnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point, New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.